Good afternoon and welcome back to the Leadership Institute studios. I'm Kyle Bechet, Communications Manager here at the Leadership Institute. Our live webinar today is going to be a good one. We're going to be talking about messaging. Specifically, we're going to talk about how candidates message, how campaigns message, and how we talk about issues in today's world. And I'm even more excited because of our guest today. Our guest is Stephen Sutton, the Vice President of Development here at the Leadership Institute, and probably one of our best faculty members here at our many trainings. So I'm excited to have this conversation with him today about messaging and give you a glimpse of the many things we talk about here at the Leadership Institute training. With that, thank you, Steve, for joining us.
Thank you, Kyle. Pleasure to be here again.
Yes, you are a regular attendee of these webinars, so we're excited to have you back. But before we start today, I just want to remind everybody at home, let everybody at home know that this is a live broadcast, but you can have your questions asked and answered on air, and you do that by emailing us at live@leadershipinstitute.org. Also, join in today's conversation on messaging by using the hashtag LIWebinar on Twitter. And who knows, maybe we'll even throw you a retweet or get in touch with you about a training or something like that. And after this event is over, it is being recorded, so we will put it on our Activism on Demand page. And if you stay to the end of the broadcast, I'll let you know how to get there. With that, Steve, messaging, big topic.
It is. It should be.
We were just talking off air that you talk about this for 6 hours between the Campaign Management School and the Future Candidate School hosted here at the Leadership Institute. Give us a brief overview of, not quite 6 hours, maybe 6 to 10 minutes of messaging and what we can expect to talk about today.
Well, today we're going to talk just in general terms at the Campaign Management School and the Future Candidate School. Those are 4-day schools, and so we drilled down into the roots of really specifically how to develop your message, and then different ways to talk about it, and we'll get to some of that today, I think. But I think it's the greatest challenge. It's the old saying that conservatives win every debate but lose every election, and that's less true now than it used to be. But even still. You won't win an election simply based on policy and convincing people that your policy is better than the other side's. It's all messaging and branding, which is is I think our biggest challenge on our side. The left is much better at it, and it's not deceiving people or manipulating them. It's putting your best foot forward and describing things in a way that connects with people so that they can actually agree with you and vote for you, right, and support the things that you want to do, but in a way that is convincing to them. People say, how do I convince people to vote for me? Right. And that's the key challenge, is how do you convince them? And it's beyond issue persuasion. It is message development, and that's how you convince people. Right. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. The greatest challenge that we have is that we often are out-messaged by the other side, because they're talking from here and we're talking from here. And so we're talking about the benefits of different issues. If we ever get to benefits, we talk about features of different issues. And we're so convinced that we're right that we expect people to be persuaded by a rational presentation of our issue targets. It's almost, and that's not what motivates people. Yeah. And in fact, it frustrates the left. They believe incorrectly that we've duped all of these working class people to vote against their own interests, as they define them, because we fool them with meaningless issues that convince them to vote against their best interest. Right. But of course, they're voting against their own best interest in certain areas. And so that's an interesting discussion as well.
As you were talking about, it's like sort of that purity argument where just because I'm right, therefore I'm going to win 100% of the time. It doesn't work that way.
No, and there are countless examples where it doesn't work. Yeah, and
I think we'll get into some of those examples today. Right. But let's walk through some more of the basics of messaging a little bit more. Right. When you talk about messaging, what do you mean? Is it building, a resume of credentials? Is it building, an issue platform, or is it something else?
It is definitely something else. It's in marketing, in sales and marketing, it's the distinction between advertising features versus advertising benefits.
Right.
That's a distinction that many people, a mistake that people make. It's not a benefit until the person who is the purchaser tells you that it's important to them. And then it shifts from a feature to a benefit. Otherwise, it's just a litany of features. A car salesman, you walk in and they start listing all the features.
Right.
And inside your head, you're thinking, well, I don't care, I don't care, I don't care. If you verbalize that, maybe they'll adjust. But that's why they should be asking you, what are you looking for, instead
Right.
of just attacking you with features. And at the point that you say, well, I'm looking for this, this, and this, they say, oh, well, that's amazing. That's this model right here. It has this, this, and this. Now those are benefits because
Right.
so how do you figure out what are benefits to voters as opposed to features? And so part of that is focus grouping or just talking to people, but you have to think of it in terms that will persuade them. And you don't do that with a litany of features. What's important to somebody and how you talk about it. Let's start with the old adage that people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. This is, again, a classic problem that our side falls into. It's almost a trap of our own making. And you have to show people you care. I think that if I was forced to say what's the single most important thing that conservatives need to do on the campaign trail and otherwise, it is convincing people that you care. The attack of the other side will constantly be we liberals care, and as conservatives, you don't care. You care about yourself, you care about the rich, you don't care about us, whatever that us may be. And so you're going to have to face that attack anyway. And that's why it's so important that candidates have a certain level of in their district that they're running in, a certain level of familiarity, that people know who they are, and they have some name ID, and hopefully positive name ID, because it will make the attacks less likely to take hold. It will also show people that you care. Voters can tell if you're running to do something or if you're running to be someone.
Right.
If you're running to do something, you should have done something. We all know of the rich person who sells their business and says, I'm bored, I think I'll run for governor, or whatever. They usually
Right.
go for governor. And so they're running to be somebody. If you're running to do something, though, okay, you should be able to say, and look at what I've done. And by telling that story, you're going to show people how much you care about the community. And hopefully there's some substance there. And so that's what it takes. It takes being able to show people. Everyone's going to say that they care, but can you convince people?
Right.
And then there's different ways to do that. But you have to tell them your story. It is not what you've done, it's why you've done it. It's not who you are, it's why you are that is what people really care about. And once you've convinced them that you care, then they'll listen to your solutions and they'll have some credibility. So the question is not what is your solution to this problem. The question is, why is that your solution to the problem? And that's what conservatives very, very, very often skip that part. They never get to the why. The left always talks about
Right.
the why. Compassion, caring, I want to help people, I'm for you, I'm fighting for us. And then they divide based on that basis, where they're in the majority, and they try to marginalize conservatives. We should think in those same terms because that is persuasive. Why do you believe this? I mean, I'm a conservative because I want to help people.
Right.
And then you make that case that, in fact, it's conservatism that has helped the most people make the greatest gains. And you explain that and how that's affected your life. And so if we get to that point, then we start winning and convincing people. So it's not just winning the election,
Right.
it's winning the issue and then getting the issue passed.
Right. Going back, it's it's building a credible case for yourself, and then going from there, and then worrying about the platform issues
Right.
that we all want to talk about. You mentioned a lot about how the left does this well. Can you give us an example of maybe something that sticks in your mind about how the left did this well, whether it be a candidate or?
I think you can find examples at every level of campaigns and politics. The left does a very good job of this. They tell their own personal story, and then they put that into the issue.
Right.
They start with that personal story. When people come to our trainings, they often will bring their campaign literature with them. Is this a good piece of literature? I'll save everybody a lot of time here. No, it's not. It's probably terrible.
Right.
And the reason is because when I look at the literature, if you could take your name off the literature and put someone else's name on, particularly one of your opponents, then it's worthless. Everyone in the Republican primary, for example, they're for lower taxes.
Yeah.
They have very similar on whether it's on social issues, typically on abortion, and on death penalty, and on taxes, and on foreign policy. In most cases, there'll be 6 people on stage, and all 6 agree.
Yeah.
So at what level will people decide you versus the other person? And that's where it becomes, why do you believe what you believe? What is basically your brand, but what's your story? I like to call it the because clause. Why is it that you support this program? Why do you believe what you believe? And the left always tells the story, how they were raised, why they believe what they believe. And on our side, we're talking we talk about those issues, but we don't personalize them to our own experience that can relate to other people. Let me give an example. Just yesterday, I had someone running for office send me an email. So this was yesterday morning. This person ran for the Board of Education and lost, but they got 40% of the vote. They're running again, and they write to me, I've been appointed to the Commission on Testing. They ran for the Board of Education. I've been appointed to the Commission on Testing and the Board of Education, and I was also appointed to the Liquor Board, and I think I have momentum to win. And then I'm working on a few priorities for my platform. This is exactly what's wrong. You didn't lose last time because you weren't credentialized enough. You're not going to out-credentialize the left. They're all about credentials. The reason you lost, I think, is because in none of this have you told me anything about your personal circumstance. If this person has said, I'm the parent of 3 with 3 children in the public schools, and that's why I want to serve on the Board of Education, a parent for a change. In fact, that's a great slogan if you're running for a school board, where everyone on the school board is a teacher or an administrator, and there's no one who's a parent with children in the school. Now, that might not be this person's specific condition, but if it is, how about a parent for a change?
Yeah.
And you're saying, shouldn't we have one person on the school board or on the Board of Education who's a parent whose children are in the current... And a lot of people will do what you're doing and say, yes, that makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah.
And that's how you'll differentiate yourself from everybody else. And no one else will be able to say that if it's truly unique to you. So you start to look at... your biography is unique to you. Share that with people. No one else can say those things. But other people can say, I'm for more education spending, or I'm for an end to teacher tenure, or on issue-specific things, thousands of people can hold that point of view. So you're not differentiating yourself. But there's only one you. I actually went through campaign strategy with Michelle Bachmann when she first ran for Congress. And that's when I learned that she was mother of 5, foster mom to 20 plus. That is who she is. That's why she does what she does. And so it's such an integral part of her. Nobody else can say that I'm a mother of 5 and a foster mom to 20 plus children. So it immediately lets you know that she cares. You may disagree with her on specific issues, but you won't disagree with where she's coming from. And I want that kind of a person representing me. That's very, very powerful.
And you haven't even gotten to an issue at that point. Like,
That's right.
You know, in that you were setting that up, I still don't even know what she stands for in the example you were talking about. However, you know, you got me saying yes right off the bat by saying, you know, she's a mom who wants
if she's a mom, maybe she's not, but I don't know yet. But I would like to know the biography. You know, the biography. I'm a mother of 3. One of my children has special needs. I'm a recent cancer survivor, or you know, I'm making these things up. But whatever that uniqueness that shows a layer to you as to who you are, to show people that I'm running because I care. And let me show you. And then you could talk about all these other things. I've served on the State Board of Education, and I've been appointed to the Commission on Testing, and there's a reason why that's important. Otherwise, it's just a litany. Now, it certainly differentiates you. You're maybe the only one with those credentials, but that's not where you start. Okay, I'm the only one who is a member of the Kiwanis and the Elk Club and the Raccoon Club, you know, and so I'm unique because I'm the only one member of those 3 clubs. And that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about why do you belong to those? Let me talk about projects that we've done. We've helped children or whatever it is those things, those organizations do, and start there. Then when you bring in those other things, there's that layer that underlies it of caring about people, and that's what will allow people to listen to your solutions. Otherwise, they're not even going to listen. It's not more platform issues. That's just more things for people to ignore. They're shutting you off, and this is the goal of the left, to shut off conservatives. Conservatives are so much out of the mainstream that their opinions are illegitimate, so we don't have to listen to them. That's the predicate for keeping speakers to speak on college campuses and everywhere else. That you're illegitimate. It's racist, it's white supremacy, it's homophobic, it's uncaring. It's so uncaring, we're not even going to listen to your solutions. So coming up with another solution doesn't help you. You have to break through that by showing that you care as much as they do. Never concede caring to a liberal opponent. You care just as much as they do. It's just that your solutions are different and they actually happen to work.
Right.
You care so much, you're crushing the people you're trying to help because your solutions don't actually work. In that debate, we win. But if you do it on their basis, we lose. And that's the frustration. And liberals could be in Republican primaries or whatever. This is how you break through against establishment candidates, rhinos, or liberals in general. Others in particular.
A couple of points just to emphasize a few points you made.
Right.
You know, we talked in the pre-interview down in your office about how if candidates with the best credentials won every time, I think we would have a few elections that went very differently.
Absolutely.
I mean,
right. Well, this last
election,
right.
you know, alone, like no one can say that Hillary Clinton doesn't have a very long resume. It's just
the most qualified candidate for president.
Yeah.
According to
whoever,
President Obama and others.
Yeah.
She's the most qualified one. We have to vote for her.
Right.
No.
You know, and then if you look at the other side, George H.W. Bush, probably one of the more qualified. You know, served in almost every level of government.
Right.
Was well respected, very qualified, lost to Bill Clinton in that election.
Or how a two-year U.S. Senator, Barack Obama can beat Hillary first.
Right.
Certainly more qualified from the standpoint of her resume, and then John McCain.
Yeah.
So that's not what voters are looking for. Now, you can point to examples where those people did win, but I'm going to tell you that's not why they won.
Right.
Usually. And it's certainly not why you're going to win, because you're running against the machine. Whether it's a liberal machine or the establishment machine, if you're a conservative running for office, most of the time you're trying to buck that trend. So you have to show a different layer to yourself, or you're not going to crack through. You'll win 40%.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Which is name on the ballot doing nothing.
Yeah, yeah.
You would have won 38%.
It's having the ID after.
In fact, when we teach at the Campaign Management School and the Future Candidate School, how do you get from 40 to 52, 53?
Right.
Because at 40, in a district that's winnable, name on the ballot's going to get probably 40%. If it's a competitive district that you could win.
Right.
And so how do you break through that to get to a majority? You've got to convince those people in the middle who are not driven by issues. If they're driven by issues and they're liberals, they're not voting for you, as credentialized as you may be. You're not going to get them. How do you convince them to vote for you? And this is the way you do it. You have to open yourself up and explain to them not what you believe, but why you believe it.
Yeah.
And that's when you start to convince people to listen to you, and that's when you can then get into some maybe policy details where they'll say, okay, well, that makes sense. But it's coming from a place of caring and from a place of wanting to help people. And that's why you believe what you believe. And then people will start to listen to you.
Right. I think I just want to bring up one more example, and then we actually have a question from our at-home audience I want to get to. There was one example that I think we both liked that we had talked about a bunch of times. State senator here in Virginia has a good resume behind him, but also has figured out a way to package that into a good argument. That's State Senator Dick Black, who has had that palm card that talked about his record of service, lifetime of service.
Right.
and it's not just your run-of-the-mill, issue-oriented, slap whatever name you want to on to win a conservative primary type stuff.
Right. Dick Black, for those who don't know, had a career as a fighter pilot. And so how do you train? We have a lot of veterans that come through our training, and they have an advantage. Once they understand not to concede public service to politicians. Well, we have several, often they come through. I'm running against someone who's been in politics for 20 years. How do I combat, that they're the experienced candidate? I said, wait a minute, you've had a military experience and background.
Right.
You're as much a public servant. Everyone says thank you for your service, but you have as much of a record of public service as they do. It's just indifferent. We have several people who come through and end up running on a platform, a lifetime of public service. It's just in the military. And we see that now running for state office in Virginia. There were two candidates, one on each side, who went to VMI, and they promote that prominently in their ads because it says a lot to have graduated from a military academy or from VMI. Because it speaks to a person's commitment to public service, service to their country, honor and integrity, character. It says all these things simply because they went to VMI. And I think it speaks well of them. It's kind of shorthand for all the things that we want to talk about. It'll be interesting since they're different parties if they both win. And that won't be the only reason, but it's giving a layer to their record of public service and why they're running for public office, because they want to continue to serve our state and our country, because they want to put America first, because they love our country. And that's a powerful thing. And so hopefully people running for office, that everyone has, you don't have to be a veteran, but you have a story of commitment to the community, of community service, of community involvement, and you can tell that story. One of my favorite stories is a man who ran for city council in Nashville, Tennessee. And his background of community service, he has two daughters, and he started an all-girls basketball league so they could play basketball. And he went to referee school so he could ref the games. And he had dozens of parents who wanted to help him get on the council. And it's a nonpartisan position, but still, he had dozens of parents, scores of parents who wanted to help get him elected because they saw his level of commitment to the community by starting an all-girls basketball league. There's nothing political about that.
Yeah.
It wasn't a Republican league, it wasn't a Democrat league. It was a
community league.
It was a community league, and it was something for the community because he cared about his children and he cared about the other girls in the community, and parents, knowing of his character and that he would do these things, they actually asked him to run for office. He wasn't running for city council. They went to him and said, we need someone like you on the council, someone who cares about us, who cares about the community, who cares about our families, and is willing to act on that. And so starting a girls' basketball league was a way that helped elect him to city council. Now, I'm not saying everybody should go out and start a basketball league, but get involved in the community, because if you're trying to make the case to people that you're running because you care about the community, you should be able to give examples of your caring.
Right.
And the more examples that you can give with that as an explanation, that's
The
your
stronger your
why,
message is.
that's your because clause.
Yeah.
I'm running because I care about the community. My evidence, and that's where you have to give evidence, those are your issues. And let's talk briefly about issues. There's two ways.
Actually, we're going to go into issues, but
right.
I just want to stop you. And
Sure.
let me just say, as an umpire, I can
right.
relate to that.
There you go. Umpires
like,
make great candidates. Have you thought about running for city council,
I'll
Kyle?
have to keep that in mind as I am out there umpiring games and getting yelled at by all those fans that love to come to.
Well, your platform could be 3 strikes and you're out.
There we go.
Yeah, all right.
Something like that. So a couple questions from our audience here that I want to get to. First one comes from Don, who's in Florida. He asks about, so I just read an article that states that TV is still the most used avenue for information. As a grassroots candidate, how do I overcome that? How can he get his message out there and break through that?
That's a great question, because the answer may be that you can't. Next question.
What?
No, that's true. Visual trumps everything else, no pun intended. And so now there are ways to use social media to get a visual message out there. and different people experiment with that. But it's still, it's a shot in the dark to make that successful. So you should have a component of that. You should certainly have your own website. You should have video on the website, I believe. And then you should also have creative ways, not kooky ways. There's a fine line there, but creative ways to get your message out that people can access if they want to. And then experiment with other venues to get that out. I've worked with a lot of local candidates who can't afford TV. That's also why you should already have a name in the community, ideally, before you run. I mentioned the candidate with the Girls Basketball League. He ran for city council. He was well known in the community already.
Right.
And so that is a tremendous advantage. If you don't have that, it's a big disadvantage. You might ask, why are you running? Then you could be accused of running to be somebody. If you're running to do something, you should have done something. I would encourage people to get involved in the community and get a name in the community before you run for office, ideally where they're asking you to run. And then that softens the deficit of not being on TV. Now, I have to believe that if you're not on TV, it's a grassroots campaign, the other person's not on TV, given resources that are equal. If that's not the case and they're on TV and you're not, well, you know, you're gonna have a problem. That's gonna be a difficult thing to overcome. Now, there are ways to overcome that, and that's with a grassroots organization, if you have a grassroots organization. But that requires volunteers who are willing to walk doors for you and walk neighborhoods and knock on doors. And in order to do that, they have to have loyalty to you because you started a girls' basketball league and they all want to help you, or whatever the case may be. That you've been involved in the community so much so that people are willing to put time to overcome the lack of money to buy ads. That's going to be the trade-off. And that's possible. The higher up the ticket you go, the less likely you can succeed. It's difficult to run for U.S. Senate running a grassroots campaign. But I've run or helped people run city council races where we've overcome that all the time. In primaries, it's fairly easy. A lot of primaries, the person with the most money, with the most ads, don't win because the ads are wasted on people who aren't registered to vote, and they're not going to vote in this. And it's a party primary, one way or the other. And so, in fact, in this campaign that I mentioned with the Girls Basketball League, the other side started doing radio ads, which was, we figured out, they wasted 99.995% of their money was wasted. Because it was a special election. There were actually 35 council districts in Nashville, Tennessee. This was in Nashville. And they were just wasting their money, but they didn't know what else to do. They had not built an infrastructure of grassroots, and that's not something you can just turn the faucet and out comes grassroots organization. We had built that grassroots organization. So they're doing radio ads, which are rough to listen to, but just ignore it. There were people on the campaign who wanted to do radio ads to counter. It's like, you know what, they're wasting 99.99. Just, you know, let them waste that money. We're going door to door talking to voters who are likely to vote in the special election because they're homeowners and long story short, we won 70-30 in what was a swing situation, swing district. 70-30, because we focused resources, but we had to build that out. And we built out a grassroots machine. And that's doable at the local level. So, so although you may not be on TV, there's ways to counter it, and it's not the only thing you should do. So that's a great question, because I think that it occurs in a lot of campaigns.
70-30 is pretty, you know, in your
they helped
example. But, yeah, in all fairness,
you
have to give some of the win to them. Quickly, quick follow-ups on that. You mentioned, you talked in your example a lot about drafting, being drafted to run. How often does that happen on the local level? And then my second follow-up is, you mentioned how difficult it is to organize a grassroots, and that's not really the topic we're going to talk about here today, but like, what are some of the resources available to, you know, study that one further and figure out how to do the grassroots?
Those are great questions also. Well, the first part of that, being asked to run. I learned from Newt Gingrich when he ran GOPAC 20 plus years ago. There was a progression that he recommended for the best candidates. And that progression was listen, learn, help, lead. And then he took you through all that in a lecture. But listen to the problems that people have. Our girls want to play basketball, and there's no way for them to do it because they can't join the boys' league for whatever reason. So listen. People will tell you what the problems are in their local community. Then learn. Learn what the alternatives are. Learn what different solutions might be. Learn what people, I mean, you're listening and learning. The third part is help. If you care about your community, you help to solve the problems. So we're going to start an all-girls basketball league. And at the point that you listen, learn, and help, people will ask you to lead. It's one thing to run to the front of the parade. It's another for people to throw you into the front of the parade. You want them asking you. And so the best candidates are the ones that people approach and say, would you run for this office? We need you. We want you.
Right.
Because then you have a body of volunteers, donors potentially, door knockers, who will help you. And this candidate who I mentioned, he was like, I'm not running for no city council. I don't want to. That's never what I wanted to do. But it got to the point where so many people were begging him to run, he finally agreed to run for office. Well, that makes for a good candidate, although you want candidates to be enthusiastic, and he got into it, because this is what builds your organization outside of the party organization. It's great if the party is there to help you, but how many times do our candidates win primaries, go down to the headquarters, Democrat or Republican, I won the primary, I'm here for the list of volunteers, the list of donors, the list of yard sign locations, and the party laughs at you. They're like, we don't have any of that stuff.
That's funny.
And you say, well, you're supposed to. Well, that may be, but they don't. Well, if you have all that stuff, then you could go down. If they have it, it's a bonus. But if they don't, you still have an infrastructure. And this candidate had an infrastructure, and he had done other things as well. And as I mentioned, he had scores of parents that wanted to help him get elected. And those were his volunteers. And then it's a matter of training. How do you go door to door? What's the literature you're passing out door to door? What's our message? What's our theme? And how are we going to raise the money? And people did fundraisers for him. I mean, it was really an incredible grassroots campaign. But that's the way it started. And as I mentioned, it was very successful.
Awesome. Well,
now, the second half of that was...
Oh, about you mentioned how difficult it was for you to set up the whole grassroots organization. And I don't want to get into that topic.
But that plays into that, though.
Yeah.
Right, it plays into that. It's not difficult if you've done things and people, having seen you done these things, are convinced that you care about the community, and they will want to help you get elected.
Right.
If you're not getting that, maybe you're running too soon. Maybe you shouldn't be running. You know, we've had people come back after trainings. I did everything that you told us to do. I did this. I tried to raise money the way you told us, and none of it worked. And I've answered that question, great. Because now you know you should never run for office again. Because
Hard truths.
But if you truly did everything that we told you to do, but you still didn't get the support, then the marketplace is telling you you don't have the support. If you don't have the grassroots support to raise money, knock on doors, yard sign locations, and the rest of it, you don't have the support to win. You're not going to win because you have the best ideas. Everyone thinks, I stand for these things and I will get elected. You won't. And maybe you shouldn't.
Right.
You know, it's funny because we have 2 U.S. senators who have just decided not to run for re-election. And at least in one of the cases, they said, I can't win the Republican primary, so I'm not. Yes, you cannot win the primary. What does that say?
Voters don't want you.
You're admitting that the voters don't want you. Well, that's not the fault of the system or the person at the top. That's your fault. You know. So what have you done to so infuriate so many people that they do not want you to run for re-election?
Yeah.
And if you do, you'll get clobbered. That's your fault. That's not the system's fault. There's a lot of people who are running for re-election and they are getting the support. So it's such an indictment on them when they're claiming it's an indictment on somebody else. It's not.
Yeah.
And that's another great example of grassroots support. And by the way, you've had 6 years at least in office to build your grassroots army. And you have failed to do that. Well, thank you for not running.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, that is, great examples there.
Yeah. Do we need to say who those people are, or do you know who we're talking about?
I think we can leave those in the
All right.
in the dark for now. So before we went off on this, we were starting to talk about issue messaging
Right.
a little bit. So how does this change? How is this similar?
Well,
how does issue messaging
It's
fit
the
in?
next piece of this.
Yeah.
There's two ways to approach issues. One are, which issues do you talk about? You can choose which issues to focus on in your campaign. You're allowed to do that. Now, there's a current events cycle. Everyone today is talking about the truck attack in New York City today, and so you have to talk about that. But most days you can choose which issues to talk about. Now, the press may be pushing you to talk about certain issues, and that's the power of the press. They get to decide what's on page one. They get to decide what they're talking about. You see this played out every night on cable TV. You turn on CNN, you see what they're talking about. You turn on Fox News, you see what they're talking about. You turn on MSNBC, and you see what they're talking about. The hosts of the shows get to talk about the issue they want to. You have that also. So you can choose the issues you want to talk about up to a point, but you should give that some thought. You shouldn't be constantly in reactive mode. You could be proactive as well. So the first layer of issues is, which issues will you choose to talk about? The second part of that is, how will you talk about those issues? Once again, you get to talk about the issue in the way that you want to talk about it. And you see this played out on TV. So given the terrorist attack yesterday in New York City that killed 8 people, I believe, you could talk about, how did that person get in this country? And they got in on the diversity immigration program. Well, that's one way to talk about it. Or you could talk about funding for terrorism protection, the funding in New York City. You see both sides kind of planting their flags in different grounds. But you have to understand that's what's going on, and not let the other side dominate and not realize what they're doing, or you'll never talk about the issue the way you want to talk about it, or you'll never talk about the issues you want to talk about because you've let the other side drive that agenda. You have to be aware that's what's going on.
Right. Right. Just moving along, we are running a little bit out of time, so I just want to get to a few other good points today. You mentioned earlier that people come back to trainings all the time and tell you, well, I did everything you told me to do and we lost.
Right.
And that could be for a number of reasons, but the two major reasons probably, why can't I take messaging training and then go on and lose, is A, they're in an unwinnable district, and that's just,
Sometimes that happens.
That's reality.
Right.
Some districts are D plus 15 and up, or D plus R 15 and up, or it's about the climate.
Right.
How does the climate...
Or they ran a bad campaign and didn't have the resources.
Yeah, well,
right.
we
But
already
things
talked about
outside your
those.
control.
Yeah.
Things outside your
control.
The climate's important. And that's a pendulum that swings both ways. If you were a conservative Republican in 1974, after Watergate, assuming it's a swing district and winnable, you were not going to win.
Yeah.
You could do messaging and thematic and all that other stuff, and that win was in your face. You're not going to win. And in 2008, same thing. Republicans were losing everywhere because of the economy, and none of this mattered, quite frankly. You still do the best you can. And in 2010, though, the pendulum swung the other way.
Right.
And you can have a lousy campaign and with a lousy message, but your name's on the ballot and you're going to win. Sadly, people who win under those circumstances think they're geniuses, and because they won, they do the same thing, and what the tide washes in, the tide will wash out. And 2014 was a big year for conservatives and Republicans. Right. Same thing. The wind was at your back. And but what you want to do is run the best campaign you can so that you can swim against the tide and still survive in a tough environment. And that's how you build winning coalitions long term. Is that you survive the various current events that may swing back and forth. And you never know when that's going to hit. Sometimes you do know, sometimes you don't. I mean, 2018 will probably be a Democrat year. How big? That's the question. And sometimes by running good campaigns, you can mitigate the effects of those wins. Sometimes you can't. But you don't know usually until the day after. You don't know that you're going to lose by 3 votes until the next day or a week later. And lament that half your campaign staff didn't vote because they were so busy working on election day. And that's happened. You don't want to be there.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's when it comes to, what am I trying to say? When it comes to the whole messaging thing, it can make a difference, but sometimes the climate just holds you back.
Right.
And those 90 or so Republicans that did win, after Watergate, they had a message and they stuck to that message, presumably. Probably some of them were in districts that Democrats never had a chance of winning.
Right.
But the ones that did win, on some of those swing districts, they stuck to a message, and it did help them go against that tide.
Probably. The other thing is sometimes you're affected and impacted by what the national message is of the parties and of the candidates. And so it's hard to swim against that tide as well. And so if the dominant, well, typically it's the president, if the dominant political figure, let's just take current events. President Trump is the president. He is the leader, the titular head, but he is the leader of the Republican Party. Now, you may not like that. You may wish it were different or not so, or you may love it and embrace it. Either way, though, it impacts your district.
Right.
And so to completely craft an independent message when there's a national narrative that's being driven every day from the White House and from the press secretary's podium, and it's going to be very difficult to do that, which is why you typically sink or swim, like it or not, with what's happening at the national level. Now, in other countries, it's even more pronounced, where whatever the prime minister, if the prime minister wins, then you win, and if the prime minister loses, then you lose, and it's very difficult to have an identity outside of the party.
Right.
In this country, there's enough independence that you can get away with that and try it, but that has to do with, after years of branding. If Republicans are taking a hit next year, but you've been in elective office for 12 years, chances are you're going to survive because you've had 12 years to build your brand of independence, hardworking, caring, or whatever that brand may be. This is why it's so hard to defeat incumbents. Even in the early 1990s, when there was tremendous turmoil in Congress, in the congressional, it was still upper 80s, 86, 88% of incumbents won. Now, the turnover was from open seats. And you can argue many of those members decided not to run because they couldn't win. But nonetheless, I'd still rather be on the side of the 9 out of 10 who win, the incumbents, than hoping for the 1 out of 10 of non-incumbents, or even in the open seat situation. So you do get an opportunity to build up your brand by being in office for a long time. If you want an indication of what kind of year it's going to be, you can look at primaries. There are many primaries in the country where the winner of the primary will be the elected official on both sides. So who are people nominating? Often in a Republican primary, in a Democrat primary, you'll have 2 state reps, 1 state senator, 1 mayor for one of the towns, a GOP official, maybe a conservative activist, and some rich guy who just sold their business.
Right.
That's like the generic 7 people that might be in the race.
Yeah.
Well, who's winning those races across the country? Back in the early 90s, it was the outsider. It wasn't the state reps or the state senator or even the GOP official. It was the Tea Party or conservative type guy or the businessman or the activist kind of guy. And it was consistent enough to show there was a trend. And then in the years of the Tea Party, 2010 and 2014, who was winning? Initially, it was the outsider, but then it shifted because so many outsiders, once they got elected, we found out they were insiders, and then Tea Party and activists said, we can't trust these people. So now we want people with a track record of being as conservative as they say. So who started winning? The state senators and the state reps with long careers, having done what they said they would do. I think that's what people were looking for. Not in every case, there's exceptions, but there was a trend. So Roy Moore winning in Alabama, the primary, what trend, is that a trend or an aberration? Well, then behind that, you've got Corker and Flake not running for re-election. So I would say it's starting to be a trend. Is it an overwhelming trend? Is it an avalanche tidal wave trend? Well, we're not sure yet, but there's enough members who fit that model of being establishment and it being a detriment in the primary, that 3 of them have lost. I mean, Flake and Corker have already lost.
Yeah.
Without an election. They've been defeated by this new trend. And so I'd say it's more than an aberration what happened with Roy Moore. It's a trend. How strong a trend we'll see. But you can tell by what's happening before November of next year. We're already seeing in the tea leaves, and you see many Republicans retiring, and that suggests that maybe there's something going on. And they're retiring Republican districts. The likely winner will be a Republican. So what's that saying? You know, what Republican incumbent doesn't run for re-election at the height of their political power? No, guys who don't think they can win the primaries, or they have a better offer elsewhere.
Right. But when they're looking at that trend, can they just pick? I don't think we would ever recommend that somebody take a similar narrative that somebody else has built around themselves, and then just ad-lib it into your own. Because then you're getting into the problem where you have that palm card again, where it's
cookie cutter.
Yeah, it's the same.
Well, that's why you need to do both.
Yeah.
And you need to be conscious of the national narrative and the national trend, but then personalize it in your own way. If you do both, that's a very powerful thing. And it makes it very tough for other candidates who aren't doing this. And those are the people who tend to win. That's who wins a 17-candidate primary for president.
Right.
The person who understands that, understands the national trend, and sometimes it's lightning striking, and other times it's not, and understands branding. Who's the best brander of the 17 Republicans who ran in the Republican Party for president? The guy with his name on everything. I mean, he's a professional brander. And he picked them off one by one and just played them like a fiddle. It's really a remarkable thing to look at, and it's not just hindsight. When it was happening, you could see it if you understand branding, and you understand marketing, and you understand talking from here and not from here. This is a guy who went with his gut, but his gut's pretty good.
Yeah.
It's made him a billionaire. And that's why the person who wrote Dilbert and Scott Adams and others predicted that look out, this guy might win this thing because he really understands marketing more than the other guys. Well, and the frustration is some of the other guys are pretty darn successful. By the way, I would suggest that the person who understood marketing best of the other 16 was Ted Cruz. He understands marketing and branding and message development, I think probably better than the rest, which is why he ended up in second place, I would argue.
Yeah, it was kind of, one of the things I took away looking at that election is everybody who endorsed, Donald Trump at a campaign rally, especially in the primary, would put on that MAGA hat and that Make America Great Again hat. And it was weird. It was like every single event did the same thing, but it works. So,
and the president is able to get his message out by tweeting. Just last night, he tweeted something about, I think, tax reform, and every channel, it was on MSNBC as well, had a nice picture of President with the quote. He got to control the message, and his whole quote from Twitter was on there. Or maybe it was about the terrorist attack. But whatever it was a good message. It was tight, and it was busting through all of the clutter because it's the only thing. They didn't do a statement. He did it on Twitter. So say what you will, but he got that message out to tens of millions of people just by tweeting it, but then also an additional tens of millions of people that's the only thing they provided, and he's busting through the clutter. So he gets his message out, I think, better than anyone in that position ever has.
Okay. Yeah, I can't disagree with you. So my biggest takeaway from this webinar today is probably it's not always about resume building or issue development. It's about building a personal narrative around yourself, and that the rest comes in later.
And showing people that you care. That narrative needs to have that element of caring about people, and this is why you believe what you believe, and then give examples. How the left, their slogan is "Every city like Detroit," and all these places where the most horrific experiences of our schools and is based on a liberal model. How compassionate is that? So it sounds good. I'll concede that they have heart. It's just they have no brains. And so that's a fight that we should relish, and we will win. We have won it.
Yeah.
And hopefully we're continuing to push that narrative.
Moving the ball forward.
Yeah.
So I know you can go on for another 5
Yes,
hours about
and
this.
I do.
However,
But in the campaign schools.
However, we're not going to do that today. But as we mentioned, all of these, you talk about this at all of the trainings you talk about, are asked to talk in.
Right.
Campaign Management School and the Future Candidate School being the biggest two. There's one in December. There's a Future Candidate School coming up in December.
Great.
So if anybody at home wants to or is interested in learning more about this topic or those schools, then go to our website, leadershipinstitute.org/training. They can find out more about the schools there and register for those schools there. And who knows, maybe you get to meet Steve Sutton in person if you've not already. I mean, he is a very interesting guy, that's for sure.
Well, thank you.
And a Navy graduate, if you haven't noticed.
That's right. Go Navy, beat Army. Already beat Air Force.
Well, we'll see how they do this year.
I was at that game. Very exciting. When I went, we used to say beat anybody, but now we had decent teams then.
Right.
But,
well, Steve, thanks for joining us today. This was a great conversation.
Great.
I hope everybody learned as much as I learned. Thanks for joining us.
Terrific. Thank you, Kyle.
Great. And thank you all at home for joining us today. This was an excellent webinar. I am sorry we didn't get to all of your questions, but what I will do for you is I will send them over to Steve Sutton, let him see them, and he'll be able to answer them on his own time and let you know his thoughts.
Sure, I'll be happy to do that. And if you leave your phone number with it, I might even give you a call to talk about it in more detail.
Yeah.
Because sometimes just a quick email back and forth doesn't really get to it.
Right.
If you do, I'll return every email and every phone call. That is a promise.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Thank you again. So you heard it. You can have a personal conversation with Steve Sutton after this broadcast, and I have some of the questions that didn't get asked on air today, and I'll give them to him right away. So thank you again for joining us today. Our next webinar is in the works. We'll be looking at a campus focus next time, but I'll have more details for you on that later. If you're interested, when the time is right, and we have it all, the details ironed out, it will be at leadershipinstitute.org/live, and you can find all of our webinar trainings there. But if you want to view this webinar later or send this webinar to a friend later, it has been recorded and will be archived on leadershipinstitute.org/activism on demand. With that, thank you for joining us on our conversation about messaging today. Have a good night and a good weekend.